What you failed to appreciate, Pitlander, Angus, the Mormor of Strathclyde uttered, as a thermal picked at the waves, is that your ancestors were heathen sun worshippers when our ancestors came down to Gwynedd and brought peace and unity. Phelim looked at the island they were passing. A day and a night of sailing between the three warriors, and they had got a little south of the Eilean Vannin, the Isle of Man, ruled now by the Norse, who were using it as a staging post for the incursions they were making into Cumbraland and the Mercian west coast. Osrith had watched the water as it changed from blue-green to deepest blue, as they sailed down the Clyde and into the open water. She had watched, too, their warriors on the ship, Angus, clearly a skilled sailor, hauling the tackle, rowing the straits between Arran and Lugs, before unfurling the sail with Phelim and Eswi's help as they got to open water. And what you failed to appreciate, Strathclyder, Phelim retorted, as he put his full weight on the tiller, so the current out of the Sodor Sounds did not sweep them west to Dublin, is that, whether the Cymric came from Caerleon or from Gododin to do this, Osrith watched as the warrior looked over his shoulder with a grin to Eswi, none of our forebears were Gaelish. Waves lapped over the sides of the clinker-built boat, and Osrith, between bouts of sickness and dry heaving, being held by Finolai's brother lest she was swept overboard, felt the man laugh. None were Gaelish, he confirmed, happily, and brought Osrith up against him. Any better, he asked, and Osrith nodded, before leaning over the side again. Behind them, she noticed, fish were following them. At least her regurgitated breakfast was benefit to some living creatures. Their journey had been long, from Osrith's point of view, though they had been underway for just over a day. It had really seemed as if Diffenwell had intended to let the three men go in the small, once Norse ship tied outside his fortress, for it was stocked with provision and skins of fresh water. And Osrith had not felt sick until they had passed Stranraer, the allied coast of Ireland shimmering milkily to the west, and they had got into the open water of the Irish Sea. We will stop at the Holy Island, Eswi said, as Osrith strained to throw up again. Nice in lie. The monks and nuns there will be able to give you something for this, I am sure. Perhaps, thought Osrith, or perhaps it was the child not liking the motion of the boat, or perhaps it was the sea. For she was no seafarer. The last time she had travelled on this western sea was when Taggart had captained the curragh that had taken her, Finolai, Fergus and Greoget to Caerleon. Before that, they had sailed from Doia to Rathlin to Iona. None of those journeys she wanted to repeat, and here she was, sailing out into the open sea, to Wellies, to meet Hywil Dda, of the southern kingdom of Deheubarth. But not immediately. First, they would circumnavigate Wellies and travel up the Severn River to Gloucester, to Ethelflaed's Witton, for she intended to confer something on Aethelstan. What that was, Osrith and the warriors had been sent to establish. Caerleon, or Caerleon, as Diffenwell had called it. Osrith did not truly understand the importance of that city in her cousin's heart, how it mattered to him, but she had been trying to equate it to the loss of any city from a land. Northumbria, Bernicia specifically, had held it, out of Strathclyde's reach, and became more distant when it was granted to Guthred Harthknutson, who had, to make it worse for Diffenwell, once been his father, Eochaid's slave. From slave to king in the space of a few years, and king, too, so desperately absent from the land where it had once been its bright sparkling capital. But Osrith had changed all that, if Diffenwell was to be believed, and he had been overjoyed that the city was now his. Though their marriage had never been consummated, it was written in the manuscripts and that had been copied into every annal and every chronicle and every register these British Isles over. It meant, ultimately, Constantine ruled there. How do you feel? Eswi asked, handing her a skin of water. Sick, Osrith replied, dully, and hauled herself up and was sick over the edge again. Yet, she had gone to see Guthred and said there were no hard feelings. Had he known they were still married? Something did not tally, for Constantine could not offer for her to marry again. Do you know the story, then, of how the Cymric came to Gwynedd? Angus asked, happily, trimming the sails to catch as much of the westerly wind as he could. As king of Strathclyde and Rust, he glanced at Osrith, who was not at that moment, being sick, and winked. The poor inhabitants of the land were being ravished by the gales, so they sent for help from their kin, to restore order. The Henogled, the men of the Old North. King Coel sent the first man. Cunedda was his name. Ha! Felim scoffed. Cunedda was of Man or Gododin, that makes him Pictish. But Angus ignored him. I also know, that Morgant BWLCH's betrayal of Urien meant we lost Caerleal to begin with, that beautiful, para-Rome, Christianity encapsulated. None of this, Irish Church, nonsense. Which kingdom do you think took Christianity to Urien? Patrick's, that's whose, and those heathens took him, and enslaved him, and he had in his heart enough of God's will to teach them. It took years before it came back and Pitland saw the light. Well, perhaps, Felim replied, had Urien's kin decided to look east, they could have saved Comsil the bother, and converted Pitland. Had they not decided on the easy pickings of Gwynedd for their aidings. And so it went on, old, ancient squabbles from centuries past, before the coming of Comsil to Iona, before Augustine in Cent, before, even, the Angles had established a foothold in Bernicia and Mercia and the east, or the Saxons on the south coast. And Osrith felt heartened that she belonged to these ancient traditions, more deep-rooted than any other epithet she had been given. Osrith of Usht was becoming the one of which she was most proud. So, who rules Gwynedd now? Osrith asked, as a calmer sea became them, and the boat glided south, with a bit of west, skimming the water as the October sun warmed them all. Anarord, of the house of Aberfraw, Angus replied, proudly. Direct descendant of Urien's brother, Llywelyn, through Merfyn Ffraich. They called him, the foreigner because he came from Man, but he was the Valtclut, and directly descended from Llywelyn himself. Another of your kin, Angus added, looking to Osrith, smiling as if imparting that knowledge was a gift to her. Which means Hywel, who is his nephew, is also your kin, Eswe pointed out. For he is Anarod's nephew. As was the brave Cadafil Cadamed, he added. Angus sucked disapprovingly through his teeth. Not brave. Osrith asked. Cadamed means battle decliner, Felim pointed out, happily, as Angus scowled at him. The kingdoms failed, Angus interrupted, glaring at him. The bastard Picts, who let the Angles win at Carthage, through their betrayal, meant all our houses were overthrown, and there was great disruption throughout all the kingdoms of the men of the north. That killed it. Silence descended like a cloud over the ship, as Angus looked south, at the wide, open sea. Nothing seemed to be around at all, and Osrith wondered if they were heading to any land at all, or whether this really was, as the old legends her mother had told her were, the way to the little people. Her mind drifted to something else, too. Hywel was her kin, so that was why Constantine wanted her to deliver the message with the idea of a potential uprising, sometime in the future. If she were kin, he was obliged to hear her out. At least. Let's hope this girl growing inside me lets me stop throwing up sometime in the near future then, Osrith thought, as another wave of nausea churned her stomach. Now, Angus continued, that was Merfyn's before the Norse took it, he added. Though getting that back would be an impossible task, even if Dyfnwal were to dry. But he is favouring the Western Isles Norse, is he not? Felim pointed out, relaxing in the tiller as the wind skimmed them faster still. Yes, Angus replied, grimly. I can, as you can, only see that Alba is the future, not separate kingdoms, or we will all be eaten by the Norse. Agreed. Felim nodded. For once, Osrith thought, for the two warriors had bickered almost non-stop since leaving the Clwtest under a gale, Eswe said, after a time that had been full of refreshing silence. And it started off again, with Felim pointing out that, though Sainid Mac Alpin had married a Gael, he had been Pictish, and Eswe pointing out more Gaelish ancestry by way of Dol Riatu, and, if t'd not wanted Constantine and Domnall to be brought up in the Gaelish way, then perhaps he should not have sent them to Urien. And if Eochaid had not sided with Giric, Felim dug back, we would have a culturally Pictish king on the throne of Alba, not a culturally Gaelish one. Nothing to do with me. My father fought for Domnall, against Griogr, Engus replied, defensively. However, you have to admit, Flansenna's regain of territory is now our loss. Osrith closed her eyes. The noise of the men's moderate arguments faded in her mind and she curled up in her cloak and slept, and was awoken several hours later by the lapping of water around the hull of the ship. Osrith sat up, stiffly. We are here, Eswe said, as Osrith yawned and rubbed at her face. Where is here? She asked. Bardsey. Holy Island. Nice in lie. He leaned across, and Osrith could see, in the growing gloom, that a monastery was sitting on a hill on an island. Somewhat smaller than Iona, there were people outside, and they were waiting for you, Eswe told her, when Osrith asked, but she was too tired to ask why, or fully appreciate the welcome. Are you fit? Will you be able to get to the refectory for supper? With help, Osrith managed to disembark, and Eswe held her arm as monks walked with them. Phelim and Engus waiting at the door, its inside lit by candles. We knew you were coming, but were expecting you sooner, one of the monks told her. I am Nennius, named after the famous scriptwriter of our culture, and I am the abbot. Osrith, she told him, shortly, and let Nennius take them into the hall, where food and drink of all kinds waited for them. Engus tells me you will manage a little milk, Nennius told her, noting her bump. And there is whatever food you can manage. My thanks, said Osrith, and was pleased to find her stomach had settled and she actually felt awake. Yet, something did not feel quite right. The monks looked uneasy, hurried. It is the air, Eswe assured her. You are not used to it. You have spent nearly 2 days being sick, and our food, well, it is not as good as this. He looked around the tables again. All this, for us? Osrith wondered, for the monks had left them alone. There is enough here for 50 men. There is enough here for a royal court, Eswe said, carefully. And then he told her that, indeed, the royal court, Anarord and his son, Idwell, and others were shortly to arrive. In the next day or two, Engus told her, when he had spoken to Nennius. Though they are our cousins, we will be gone by then, Engus told her. We are under strict instructions to see Hywel ap Cadil only, his nephew. Hywel Dda. We were expected earlier than this, and must not be here when the royal family of Gwynedd arrive. But there was something more, Osrith could sense it. No use could come of worrying what that was, she told herself, enjoying fish, and a green, gelatinous substance with bread, that was, though strong and tasted of the sea, delicious, and she found she was wanting more, though she could not eat a single bite more. We will sleep here, Engus told them, and underway at dawn. The monks have very generously let us rest here, he added. Nennius, who seemed to have been lingering nearby. Let us tell you a tale, he said to them, in Cymric. And as they listened, they heard the tale of Brandwyn and Bran and the wicked Efnisian, who at the wedding of Matholwch and Brandwyn, mutilated the Irish king's horses, causing him to mistreat Brandwyn, and making her call for Bran to bring her back to Iceman, the island they had passed, the capital of Gwynedd. And Osrith slept well in new sheets, and in the morning, before they left, nuns came and asked her whether she wanted to bathe, which she did, and offered her food which she did not, except for the green substance she had eaten the night before, and the abbess told her it was boiled seaweed called lavr. No, Osrith insisted, as the nuns tried to take her old clothes and give her an under and over dress. I am a warrior. So they brought her new breeches, shirt and jerkin, and the abbess gave Osrith a good deal of lavr wrapped well in thick linen. The last thing to do was retrieve the letter for Hywel, which she put inside her jerkin again. They were underway at dawn, indeed, and Osrith was all the better for a good sleep and good food. But the ship did not sail far. There was a cove just around the corner, and Engus pulled the ship about till they could watch the harbour. After an hour, there was indeed a ship pulling into the quay. Nennius was out to greet the ship, and several people got off first. Osrith could just make out pale golden hair, like Diffenwell's, on the biggest of the two figures. 2 men, similar in height, disembarked next, followed by what looked to be a woman. Guards followed them, and there was indeed about 40 altogether. That is Anarord, Engus explained, When Osrith asked about them, Idwulf his son, the bald. No hair ever grew on his head. It was a curse from the Mersins, from Ethliad when he lost his campaign in Gwynedd. He planned to come from Aberfraw, the capital, to meet you. It was meant to be a chance encounter. This was Eswi. Why? Osrith asked, turning to look at him, before unwrapping the lore and taking a nibble. Because you are supposed to be meeting Hywel, Engus explained, and then nodded to the linen. How you can eat that, though, Engus teased her, when she paired some lav with bread. We feed it to the horses. Which is why the horses at Glashku were also content, Osrith quipped back, and noticed the absence of sickness in her stomach, and that she was able to sit upright in the ship now without wanting to throw up again. This chance encounter, Osrith persisted, noticing that Felim's and Eswi's faces indicated they knew, too. Because Anarord and Hywel hate one another, that's why, Engus explained. Hywel has already annexed Seisulg and joined Dyft and Ceredigion to make Deheubarth. We shall see where the kingdom begins as we turn south. So Anarord wants to know why I'm meeting Hywel. Engus glanced at Eswi, who looked to Osrith. Hywel will not speak to you if he knows you have spoken to Anarord, Eswi said, darkly. Anarord is almost at war with Hywel for what he considers incursions on Gwynedd. Yet, he will not live long and Idwil will be king. He is less at odds with Hywel, shall we say. So, Eswi summed up, whatever is contained within your letter, Lady Osrith, will be irrelevant, for he will assume Anarord has come to some prior agreement with Constantine. Lady Osrith laughed to herself. She had given up asking them to drop it, for he had no land, or had any Kwesi into it at all. And Felim jumped out into the cove's shallows, pushing the ship off the bank before leaping back in, the wind whipping up quickly and favorably. As the day wore on, a bay curved to the east, long and wide, and, as they sailed ever further south, and for an autumn day it was warm, another peninsula projected out into the sea. Tideway, Eswi told her. I trained here, though my years there were few, he added. Hywel's capital. Then we are nearly there, Osrith said, her voice hopeful. Deliver the letter that Constantine wrote, which she had kept safe even from the nuns who just wanted to tidy everything belonging to Osrith, and she had had to call one of the nuns back to return it to her. No, you forget, Eswi said, gently. We are going around Wales, and will be in Gloucester first. He was right. So Osrith curled her blanket around her when the surprising heat from the sun in late October was replaced by a set-in sea breeze. Lady Osrith, Eswi said to her, as he sat beside her, on the hull of the ship, where the motion of the boat was less dynamic. Finoli. Findel, can you tell me about him? Tell me what he was like when he was in Domhnall's service with you. Very loyal, Osrith told him. And she told Eswi all she could remember, from the first day, when he had taught her to ride, on the road between Dunnottar and Stirling, of the night when he had taken her by the hand so they could flee Glashku, of her time training and working with him and his disappearance at Dara. Of the four of them, all easy in each other's company, Finoli carefree and a carer of others. Fergus, as long as he was fed, everything else came to him. Tag. It hurt to remember her to be husband, the soulful man who was as tough as weathered willow. He is at Caerleal now, Eswi said. I went back to see him, very briefly. He is a priest, now, like I am. He said you did him the greatest of service. But Osrith did not elaborate on her service, of giving the last of her silver so he could escape the Slavers. Instead, she asked Eswi about their childhood together, on Arran, educated by the monks from Iona, and she closed her eyes shortly afterwards, as a sea eagle circled over them, making the kaka call of their species as they look for their roost. Felim and Engus had been taking turns to get them past the end of Wales and turn east under the cover of night to minimize potential attacks by Norse acting as raiders wanting a quick wealth fix, and Osrith had woken to the ship bobbing at a rude harbour on the south coast of Deheubarth, with Engus in close conversation with two people on beach. Eswi was with them too, as a Felim slept at the other end of the ship, and when he saw Osrith stand up, gave her a wide wave. Osrith waved back, but might have stretched too far, because she felt the familiar nausea in her stomach and was sick all down the side of the ship, reaching for a skin to rinse her mouth. When she looked to the two warriors again, she saw Angus bring two women to the ship, and he called Osrith to them. One of the women, on seeing her pregnant stomach, said something to the other, and pulled out of a basket a large brown, grey loaf, and a wooden bowl containing what Osrith knew to be laurel. "They say, I think," Angus told her, "that you can have the bread and seaweed. I have paid them. They are of Dyfed," he added, as if this was important. And the women helped Osrith down onto the sand and sat by her, pressing the food to her, and saying words which, though she could not understand. In the end, the younger woman mimed eating it, and the strong, rich laurel flavor tasted good with the soft, new-baked bread. "They speak Cymric here, too," Angus told them, "but a changed Cymric, like one which was originally spoken in the lands that are now Wessex, and in West Wales, Cornwall folk speak it too, and, they say, those people living just over the water." And Angus went on to tell them that the Cymric of this coast had always been at odds with the Cymric who had come from the Henogled, the Old North, and settled in Gwynedd, and Osrith found she was not surprised at the folk memory, that must have been over 400 years old, was still persistent. "They prefer the Gaels," Eswi told her, and Osrith noticed the satisfaction in his voice, and looked when he pointed out a huge island, named after the species of bird that most densely populated it. "Lundy," he told her. "Do they mark Samhain?" Osrith asked him, for it was close to that Gaelish festival. "No," replied Angus. "Not down here. Do you feel the scythe? Still, if I do, it is not strongly," Osrith replied, truthfully, and it was true that, when she was in Alba, whether Bishand, or Strathclyde, their presence seemed almost overwhelming at times. Phelim took the helm now, as Eswi took the tiller, and it was Angus's turn to sleep. Osrith watched the gradual convergence of coasts as they made their way east following the Cymric coast, and Phelim, whether to mark Samhain or not, began a soft song, of a wanderer from his cold mountains who was travelling to the land of his kin and chanced upon a fay of the scythe one night of Samhain, moonlight and starlight making jewels in her hair and on her dress, and he was enchanted to watch her dance, and the fell in love with her, and she him. Of course, it is always the fay who has to give up something for the man, Eswi remarked, caustically. She had given up her immortality to live immortal life with him, when she hardly knows him. Such is the way of things, Osrith thought. A woman's life is never her own, it is her father's, her brother's, her husband's which she must follow, or her king's. Osrith was sick once more, as the coasts narrowed again, and suddenly, there was a jolt as Phelim drew the ship to one side, looking out across the estuary of the river. "Sephan," he told Eswi, when the warrior asked, and Osrith looked back to the land, knowing it to the same river that she had her Mercian warriors had followed in pursuit of Utad and the children Ethilistan and Elfwin, and the one they had taken back to Saltwick a few days later, in a more dignified manner. Had that been only a few months before? It was now nearly November, and that had been August. Her bump had barely rounded her stomach then, but now it was difficult to hide. And there was something else, too, something Osrith knew was not quite right, but before she could set her mind to discovering what that was, the wave came. 88,888,888. Not a wave that the sea might give, a regular, stormy bump that broke on the hull and passed you up over it. This wave was more a continuous swell, which gathered in the estuary and grew and grew. Whether Phelim or Eswi or the now awake Angus understood what it really was, none said, and Eswi screamed for Osrith to hang on to the ropes that were used for tying up, and he stumbled towards her, tying her arms to them. The wave hit, and did not break, and the ship travelled with it up the river, the swell seeming to pull them up in the wrong direction of the Sephan's flow. Phelim fought to draw in the sail, which was making the effect worse, and Angus's arms, as thick as adolescent trees, held the sail inwards to lessen the effect. Osrith closed her eyes. She opened them when she felt a hand on her shoulder and a soft voice calling her name. "Eswi, she managed, as the spy's black hair fell over either side of his shoulders, and his pale blue-grey eyes looked at her intently. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and Osrith blinked several times, trying to get her bearings. There had been a wave, she knew. I don't think so," she replied, and he helped her up. "It's called a tidal bore," he explained to Osrith as Phelim caught her other hand and helped her up onto the dockside. "We expected a swell, for we are later than we anticipated. But it is a spring tide, which made the effect more. And we are here." Here was Gloucester. As Osrith looked around, she could see a neat, well-used harbour which someone had gone to the trouble to bring rocks to the river bank, to make the constant landing of merchant ships more durable. Beyond the harbour, stakes were driven into the ground, where eel traps were set. They would be bountiful that evening, no doubt, Osrith thought, with such a force of tide. "Perhaps," Angus said, as they pulled their belongings from the ship, "or the power drove straight through them and broke them." He looked up at the buildings which began the city of Gloucester. "We are here in time, though," he added, "and it is indeed Samhain. Tomorrow, Ethelflaed will be addressing the Witan after the cathedral service for All Saints' Day." "And we must be there," Osrith replied, for she was decided. Whatever it was they were in Gloucester for, there was something she had to do, to make a wrong right. 88,888,888. And, it was over to Osrith, too, to make arrangements for the night. The city, with wide, green fields around it, was densely packed, arranged in a grid-like system, planned and executed by the lady herself. So was the boast of the landlord of the Swan when Osrith asked about lodgings. "Not herself surely?" Osrith asked, and the landlord squinted at her, Osrith's accent throwing him a little, as she imagined the woman marking out the grid lines, handling and hauling the stone. She came out of the image as the man rapped on the counter. "Irian," Osrith said. "My companions have difficulty with the English and the Saxon tongue." It was at this point the landlord switched to the Cymric that the Dyfed women had been using, which was even more difficult for Osrith to understand than his sprawling Saxon dialect. "He says 2 rooms," Osrith translated, making out that Angus was their leader and was struggling with the man's words in any language. "We are here for the Witan." The man frowned. "Come to make your plea to the lady?" he asked, sniffing a bit of mucus back up his large, red nose. "Land, is it? Or pirates?" "Norse," Osrith said, as the man continued to pour ale. Though they had not asked for it, Osrith's silver seemed to imply it was part of the bargain, and there were no complaints from Eswi, Angus and Phelim. "You are out of luck," the landlord told her. "You would never get rooms here if there was going to be of it, and the lady is not here." "Not here on All Saints' Day?" Osrith asked. The man shook his head. "She is up country, at Cester." "Norse, as you say," he told her, and Osrith relayed this back to the warriors. They took their drinks to the back of the alehouse and began to talk about what to do next, as more customers piled in through the narrow door. "We go the still," Osrith proposed. "We were told to come to the Witan in Gloucester." Constantine did not say it was to do with Ethelflaed, he mentioned Ethelstan. None of the 3 men with her could think of a better alternative and agreed to be up at dawn, the 3 of them keeping watch over them all in the 2-room, which smelled of horse, for it was indeed an animal loft. Sick again, and Osrith was up far before dawn and got herself down from the loft and spoke softly to Eswi, who seemed to be away in his own thoughts when she got to alehouse door. The noise from within suggested that even in these early hours the prostitutes of Gloucester were busy touting for trade. "I have been here before," Eswi told Osrith, as he stared across the stableyard to the conical tower of the cathedral. "My mentor at Tideway thought it would be good for me to experience the Augustine church. I lasted 3 weeks." Osrith paused in her action of pushing open the misshapen oak door. "So you know the city?" she asked. "I know the city," Eswi said, and there was a sadness to his voice. "I know the city, knew the priests, the monks." He shook his head, and then focused on Osrith. "You are up early?" "I need to pee," Osrith said, "and some water." "Sick," she added, held her stomach as a wave of nausea passed. Try the other side of the stable for a private corner. I'll get some boiled water. Milk. Water, Osrith agreed, gratefully, and when he brought it back, sat next to Eswe as he looked across to the city's streets again. Oswald is here, Osrith said. My ancestor Ethliad sent him here, to give good blessings to Mercia. If the object was to turn the tide on Norse incursions, to smash their generals and make sure that they did not fix themselves in Mercia, then his saintliness worked, Eswe said, smiling wryly. Of course, he was your kin, he added. A person in life, our Anglecombe-Sills angel of the north, bringing his Christianity to Lindisfarne and stubborn people. This was true enough, Osrith thought. After his victory over his uncle, Edwin, at Heavenfield, that is just what he had done, wearing out at least 2 monks from Iona before Aidan managed to adhere Christianity to an animistic community. And yet, the Irish Church was still linked to this. The circle in the Irish cross was the sun offerings of flowers in spring at Wells. Osrith rested a hand on Eswe's forearm. Was she beautiful? She smiled when Eswe turned to her. Something like that. Something like that. He agreed, and turned when he saw Phelim come down the steps out of the loft too. Proto-dawn underscored the blackness when Osrith turned to look at him, and he nodded to her. You're here, he said. Angus is snoring like he's slaughtering a pig, he added. Woke me up you were gone. I was here, Osrith replied. Eswe getting me water getting ready to go to the cathedral. It took another hour for Angus to get down to them. To be fair, he had took more than his share of sailing hours, and he stripped to the waist and thrust his head and torso into one of the horse's water butts, his long hair dripping down his back as he massaged his face.